And time for me then to call upon the COSATU President, Mr. Stuermer Domenech, to give us his keynote address. A big round of applause for Umholo Basebenzi.
We met on the eve of the BRICS summit in Durban in the spirit of international solidarity and working class unity and trade union cooperation. The BRICS trade union movement gathered in Durban in the South African soil on the 23rd to the 25th of March 2013 to reflect at least on the critical challenges facing the working class in today's changing global political economy and how it impacts on workers' rights, human dignity, and sustainable development for all. We were gathered under the auspices of the BRICS Trade Union Forum, and we sought to build on the foundations laid by the Moscow Declaration, which was adopted in the first BRICS Summit or BRICS Trade Union Forum in Russia in December 2012. And we wished to express our profound solidarity and support to all workers who are involved in the struggles in defense of their rights, dignity, health, and safety, against poverty and inequalities and unemployment. To us, the significance and the concrete meaning of BRICS to workers under the current global conditions should be positioned as an alternative model of inclusive development which serves the interests of the majority. We emphasize in one voice the need for the effective and full participation of the working class in all institutions of the BRICS. Only in that way will the BRICS be different from the existing multilateral institutions. So we believe that trade policies within BRICS countries should aim at supporting industrialization. The key objectives should be the realization of the mutual beneficial trade amongst BRICS countries and amongst all countries of the world to address the imbalances between the North and the South. In addition, BRICS countries should work with other developing countries towards the transformation of the world trade system. So we are looking at this BRICS Development Bank to be a bank where there is broader participation of all to be represented there and be able to make their meaningful contribution. So we argue, because we're not represented in the South African Reserve Bank as trade unions, but in that bank we're saying labor should be represented. So uzawubona ke Minister, you'll see what we're going to do with that.
Ladies and gentlemen, then our next speaker, Ambassador Sue Clow, who is the Deputy Director General for Asia and the Middle East at the Department of International Relations and Cooperation for South Africa. A big round of applause for Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen.
The Namibian ambassador accused the EU of suffering from China psychosis. I hope we are not going to get that disease. I also want to inject a degree of realism listening to the first session. It's only 2 years since we became a full member of BRICS. Given that this configuration is less than 5 years old, and South Africa being part of it for 2 years, some of the expectations that I have seen generated in this room, I think is highly unrealistic. Let us be realistic and not kill this organization in its infancy. I would like to say that as much as our invitation did receive consideration, there were various other countries that had also formally approached the BRICS countries to become members. But they chose South Africa to become a member Prof. Habib spoke earlier on of this window of opportunity in terms of impacting a more equitable global architecture. As much as we wanted to become part of BRICS, the BRICS wanted us there. You could not create another global power bloc, because this is what the BRICS is. It is a global power bloc. And that's why it's taken so seriously. You could not create a new power bloc without the African continent being represented, because you're dealing with a new Africa, a changed Africa, a new reality. But basically, I think Minister Davis covered, we set for ourselves 4 key deliverables, and we delivered on all 4. The BRICS Bank, where we announced it's both feasible and viable, and there's a committee now working in terms of the establishment of that bank. The Think Tank Council, Professor Habib mentioned that nearly every BRICS, all of the BRIC countries have a dedicated think tank. Leave alone the BRIC countries, you have it in other parts of the world, in Europe, Latin America, the USA, dedicated think tanks focusing on BRICS. We don't have it. We incubated a think tank in the HSRC, but we want to create a full BRICS think tank. And of course, the Africa Outreach program that we spoke of, and the Business Council launch. So all 4 of our deliverables were met.
But let me bring in my other panelists then, perhaps just to give us their either responses to what already has been said by the 2 panelists, or expand on some of the things. Perhaps I should start with you, Dr. Zondi, just in responding to, I mean, one of the issues that came through from what Mr. Dlamini was saying is the issue of exclusion, that bigger parts of our continent and South Africa are excluded in these discussions. Your thoughts?
The big discussion was on this idea of a partnership between the BRICS and Africa, where partnership has come to mean many things. And on the African continent, where Africa is seen as a partner to something that is not a partner to Africa. That it's a partnership in the eyes of the other than a partnership in the eyes of Africa itself. Whether it was going to be different with the BRICS. Making the point specifically that regional integration is a fundamental response for countries that have been on the periphery for a long time. That none of these countries can actually negotiate any deal successfully on their own, even if they are considered big, like the biggest African economy, but it cannot really negotiate huge deals in the world. There's a big discussion on the development bank as a mechanism through which then these countries could translate the significant economic power they've acquired into significant political power to decide policy agendas in the world. And that therefore the linkages between the economics and the politics should not be seen. And therefore, the BRICS have a potential to become a caucus institution through which these countries caucus positions in the for negotiations in the G20, negotiations in the WTO, and any other position. And at the same time, institutions like the Development Bank could then provide the material basis to underwrite whatever they are calling for. There is also a huge expectation from the region that there will be something for them out of these BRICS. They understand the BRICS are huge economies, and they understand that they cannot negotiate with them individually too, and that the balance of trade, the balance of power between them and the BRICS is such that these individual countries cannot do it. And many of us agreed with it, partly because for reasons that Minister Davis alluded to, that I can say it, he can't say it, but I can say it, that many African countries shouldn't have existed in the first place, because many of them have no logic of existence. And that includes South Africa, by the way. And that many of them were actually created in Berlin in 1885 without any consideration for the geopolitical realities on the ground. They were drawn on a map, and then they became, bam, they became. And that one of the biggest challenges are African nationalists for their passion is for maintaining what was actually drawn up in Berlin, a lot more than creating greater spaces for our geopolitical significance, such as giving up, ceding some of their sovereignty to create really functioning regions, and so on and on. And said perhaps South Africa's the high expectations from the region for this, it does create opportunities for us to push a little stronger for regional integration in a very meaningful way.
All global developmental agendas have political foundations. You couldn't have, and so that's the first point. The second related to that is that no inclusive development agenda has been done by the market alone. It's always been in coordination with the state. And what I often find puzzling about the debate in South Africa is we have this divide between politics and economics and between market and state, when no inclusive developmental agenda can be done without both. Kolani, you're right. I think that there's a real danger that until now, Africa has been at a disadvantage in all of the scrambles that took place over the last century or 2 centuries. And it's going to, and until now, it's lost out. Because what we've had is exclusionary development, where people take, but there's very little inclusive development. Now, the only way Africa is going to be inclusively developed is if Africans develop a coherent agenda themselves. The Chinese are never going to do it, the Indians are never going to do it, the Europeans and Americans are never going to do it. Africans can only be responsible for their own agenda. And that means they have to have a proper agenda. And the problem when I hear people, I think Martin Davis said, which countries in Africa are going to be the Vietnam and the Burma, where there's low labor standards, etc. I think as soon as you're in that game, you're in trouble. And that's why one of the big things that's confronting Africa is a social accord, an investment accord, and a labor accord. Because if you don't have those 3 elements, you can't define your engagement with the rest of the world coming in.